Hello. I won't tell you who I am, because it doesn't matter. I'm just the voice between what you see and what you were never meant to know. My only purpose here is simple: to give you pieces, fragments of what's been buried. Not to convince you, not to prove anything, but to place a question in your mind that never quite goes away. If one day these videos stop, if the channel goes dark without warning, don't go looking for an explanation. Just know, silence is not always voluntary. Until then, you listen, I'll talk, and together we'll open the next file. There's a saying inside federal intelligence: the best surveillance doesn't watch you. It listens to what your body doesn't know it's saying. I didn't understand that phrase until I was sent to Tucson. On paper, it was an assignment barely worth the travel cost. Minor malfunctions in the regional traffic light grid. Systems were desynchronized without clear cause. No breach, no external signal spike, no virus signatures. The local tech teams had already swapped out hardware, rerouted the fiber, and rebooted the grid. Nothing worked. That's when they called us. I arrived under the pretext of consulting for Department of Transportation, cybersecurity compliance, but in reality, I was there to confirm a pattern. 3 other cities had reported the same glitch within the last 14 months. Different vendors, different infrastructure, same symptoms. Something was reaching into the system and bending it, but leaving no fingerprints. I stood under the first pole at East 5th and Irving, a standard camera node, or so it seemed. It was jet black, seamless, with no lens aperture visible from any angle, no blinking LEDs, no directional movement, just a sterile matte shell bolted to a rust-proof armature. I looked for cabling. Nothing. No power lines, no fiber uplink, no satellite dish. I even opened the service hatch and found a solid-state core with no storage drive, no processing unit, no port for maintenance access. Just a thin mesh of copper threading that wrapped inward like the coil of a speaker, and a silver foil lining on the interior casing. That's not how cameras are built. That's how resonance sensors are constructed. I filed a request for internal schematics to DHS. It was denied within 72 hours. Not delayed, denied. The document was classified Tier 5. I only held Tier 4. Even my contact in infrastructure intelligence hit a wall. He told me off record, whatever those things are doing, it doesn't involve traffic control. But there was still one open path. The towers transmitted. Not often and not much, but just enough. Once a week, every Tuesday at 2:06 a.m., a burst of encrypted data was sent to a node in Virginia, registered to a now-defunct defense contractor, Corp Dynamics. They went bankrupt in 2009. Their website 404s, but the server is still live and shielded under military jurisdiction. So I made a decision. I pulled the plug. I scheduled a blackout on a low-traffic night under the pretense of scheduled maintenance. I watched the intersection from inside a parked utility van. No visible traffic, no anomalies. As the system powered down, I waited for silence. Instead, the tower pulsed, a quiet vibration, low and rhythmic, almost imperceptible, not sound. Frequency. Then came the connection spike. A secondary transmission came online, this time through a passive RF band, piggybacking off nearby mobile towers, triangulating a tight corridor around the intersection. It wasn't logging traffic. It was logging movement. Biological movement. And then I saw it. A pedestrian, just one, walking through the crosswalk. As he passed beneath the camera, the signal spiked. Not by volume, but by modulation. A subtle pattern of alternating pulses, matched against a reference waveform like a biometric key, except inverted. The signal wasn't authenticating who. It was measuring what they were feeling. I ran the signal through 3 analytics platforms back at Quantico. No match in conventional audio, radar, or thermal spectrums. But in the EEG frequency band, 2.1 to 2.8 Hertz, there was a correlation, a match to datasets I'd seen once before. Back in 2011, DARPA tested a prototype under the name Silent Talk. The concept was simple. Read motor cortex signals non-invasively and map them to linguistic intention. It was scrapped due to instability, or so we were told. But this was a refinement, not meant for military comms, meant for public conditioning. When I confronted my regional liaison at Homeland about the devices, he gave me nothing but a stare. Then he asked if I'd read the Urban Emotion Mapping Protocol, a file only accessible to Tier 6. That night, I sat in silence, wondering how many cities already had these towers. How many intersections were being tuned like instruments, mapping the neurological rhythms of everyday people, not for safety, but for analysis, for control. And most chilling of all, I realized those devices weren't malfunctioning at all. They were performing exactly as intended. We tend to believe that public infrastructure is built for us. Roads, bridges, lights, cameras, designed for safety, for flow, for order. But I've learned that in Washington, nothing is ever installed for just one purpose, and no system that touches the public goes unnoticed by those who wish to shape it. The first time I heard the term resonant signature extraction, I was in a closed-door briefing in Langley. The speaker wasn't military. He was from a private contractor with no logo, no website, and no paper trail. He described a future where you wouldn't need a fingerprint or retinal scan to identify someone. You'd only need a moment, one heartbeat, one breath, and the electromagnetic pattern of their brainwaves would tell you everything, not just who they were, but how they felt. At the time, it sounded theoretical, a far-off dream for DARPA scientists buried in electromagnetism, white papers and funding memos. But when I analyzed the waveform captured at the Tucson intersection, it wasn't a dream, it was working. The waveform spike I saw, tied to a passerby's emotional state, matched historical data tagged under neuroaffective markers. That term doesn't appear in any public research database. But in 2014, I handled an interagency packet labeled Project GLINT. It detailed how controlled urban environments could be used to elicit, measure, and eventually shape the emotional baselines of large populations. Through what? Ambient surveillance, not visual, not auditory, neurological. Which brings us to the real question. If these towers aren't filming us, what are they actually for? Are they logging emotional deviations in crowds to predict riots before they happen? Are they creating psychological baselines to detect future dissenters before they dissent? Are they mapping fear responses, joy responses, guilt, hesitation, to refine law enforcement algorithms, sentencing models, predictive policing scores? Or, and this is the one that kept me up at night, are they conducting a live experiment on behavioral compliance, one crosswalk at a time? And why do none of these towers appear in procurement records? Why are they exempt from municipal maintenance contracts? Why does every data packet they send route through federal relay servers originally assigned to drone surveillance programs in the Middle East? You might think, but wouldn't someone blow the whistle? Someone did. A civil engineer in Oregon submitted a FOIA request regarding strange devices installed at a Portland intersection in 2019. His request was denied due to National Behavioral Research exemptions. That phrase doesn't exist in public federal code, but I found it buried in a 2007 amendment to the Urban Threat Detection and Management Act, hidden under Clause 12. B. Neurological data harvested under passive municipal observation programs shall not be subject to citizen review. Let that sink in. The government admitted, on paper, that it could legally collect brainwave data from civilians without consent, without disclosure, without oversight. And no one noticed. So here's what I started to ask myself, and what you should too. What happens when your thoughts, not your actions, become data? What happens when fear, shame, confusion, or hesitation are logged like criminal records? What happens when your own body starts testifying against you, and you didn't even know it was speaking? These aren't hypotheticals anymore. They're blueprints. Blueprints being built into your cities, your sidewalks, your stoplights. Every time you step into the crosswalk and look up, they may not be watching your face, but they could be listening to the silence in your head. I brought my findings to a former colleague at the Bureau, someone still active, still trusted. He told me quietly, "We call it the empathy map." I asked what it was for. He answered, "To see what scares people before they say it out loud." That answer still haunts me, because if they already know what scares you, what exactly are they planning to do with that information? A month after Tucson, I visited a suburban test grid outside of Des Moines. On the surface, it looked like any other sleepy neighborhood. Carefully spaced trees, symmetrical speed bumps, and cameras placed with surgical symmetry. But here's what made it different. None of the intersections had stop signs, and yet no one ran them. Why? Not because of enforcement. These cameras weren't connected to any citation network. They didn't record plates. They didn't trigger tickets. But they glowed, a faint pulse, soft red, like an artificial eye barely open. I stood at one of those intersections for 2 hours. 96 cars passed through, all of them slowed. Some drivers even paused at a green light, as if unsure whether to proceed. There was no law holding them back, only presence and suggestion. That's when it clicked. This wasn't surveillance, it was conditioning. I later got access to a white paper from a private contractor working under the Urban Behavioral Feedback Initiative. The document was marked Informational Ecology Design. It argued that when visual stimuli are arranged with just enough ambiguity, a non-blinking light, a blank camera shell, a soundless click, the human nervous system begins to negotiate with its own sense of uncertainty. In plain English, the environment starts writing rules into your brain without you ever knowing you agreed to them. And now we arrive at the next layer, machine learning. See, the towers don't just emit, they record feedback loops. Not traditional feedback, but biometric echoes, skin conductivity, pupil dilation, micro-movements in your gait. All of it can be read by high-resolution proximity sensors embedded at ground level, disguised as crosswalk pressure pads or manhole covers. That data doesn't go to law enforcement. It goes to behavior modeling engines, most notably one labeled Neurogrid V, which I once encountered in a Department of Defense internal memo. Neurogrid wasn't designed to track people. It was built to track responses to stimuli, light levels, sound pulses, word clusters, and predict how long it would take for an individual to break routine under psychological pressure. Do you see it yet? They're not watching what you do. They're training environments to see how long you obey. One subsection of the memo haunted me. It read, "Adjust lighting hue by 6.2% cooler. Reduce audio by 4 decibels. Increase presence signal intermittence from 22 seconds to 17 seconds. Subject is expected to exhibit hesitation at 63% probability." Subject, that's what you are now. Not a driver, not a citizen. A subject, in a nationwide experiment without disclosure, consent, or oversight. A laboratory without walls, where your reactions become fuel for simulations designed to rewire instinct at scale. Still think it's about traffic? I submitted an anonymous inquiry to a contractor once rumored to have built the core architecture of Neurogrid. The answer came 3 days later through an encrypted relay. You're asking the wrong question. It's not about what they're doing now, it's about what they're preparing us for. So, what are they preparing us for? A society where consent is engineered, not granted? Where law enforcement isn't deployed reactively, but preemptively, based on predicted resistance? Where citizens don't just follow laws, they self-correct without ever being told? And here's the final twist. The Department of Education recently issued guidelines encouraging environmental behavior shaping in public schools, not through curriculum, but through spatial design, lighting, sound, wall color, sensor placement. If they're starting with children in schools and testing adults at intersections, then the experiment isn't limited to traffic control anymore, is it? It's becoming cultural architecture. We are not in the age of surveillance. We are in the age of compliance without command. And by the time you notice the rules, you've already rewritten your instincts to follow them. You might be wondering, if this is all true, why hide it behind traffic cameras? Why bury advanced neural mapping beneath pedestrian crossings? Why not implement it openly, like biometric scanning, facial recognition, or digital ID programs? Because this isn't about control through authority. It's about control through invisibility. The moment a population knows it's being measured, it begins to behave differently. This is a principle known in cognitive science as the observer effect. But in federal documentation, it's called conscious feedback disruption. The objective of the system isn't just to gather information, it's to gather it before you know there's a reason to resist. The program thrives in shadows because clarity would kill its precision. I once reviewed a now restricted file labeled Opal Frame, a multi-agency collaboration between the NSA, DARPA, and an unnamed corporate entity specializing in biometric signal processing. The document outlined a shift in strategy away from overt surveillance and toward what they called pre-conscious biometric architecture. It stated, verbatim, to maintain behavioral stability in democratic populations, signal interception must occur beneath the threshold of narrative awareness. In simpler terms, the system must operate below your story. It must influence before you create a reason to reject the influence. And that's why these cameras, these non-cameras, matter so much. They don't just watch, they wait, they log. And when the data is rich enough, they begin to predict. Not just actions, but hesitation, agreement, instinct, guilt. I've seen the dashboard, a real-time behavioral heat map of a medium-sized U.S. city. Not from street cams or facial scans, but from neural response sensors embedded in everything from parking meters to bus stop benches. The entire population, glowing in soft hues of red, blue, and green, each shade representing a psychological metric: agitation, trust, latency. volatility. There was no name attached to each dot, but each dot was alive. And that's the final truth they'll never put in a press release. The surveillance state is no longer interested in what you've done. That's old data, dead data. What matters now is what your biology suggests you're about to do, or worse, what you might think of doing under pressure. So who owns that predictive power? You might say, the government. But that's an outdated answer. Many of these systems are developed by private contractors, shielded by non-disclosure agreements, immune to FOIA requests, and exempt from congressional oversight under national behavioral stability exemptions. In short, you can't vote them out. You can't sue them. You can't even prove they exist without breaching classified protocol. And yet, they're in your cities, on your street corners, listening to what your nervous system broadcasts without your permission. Which brings us to a dangerous fork in the road if entire cities are being used to train these algorithms, not just to watch, but to reshape instinct. Then what does that make the people inside them, citizens or subjects or test data? What's the end goal here? A society so behaviorally compliant that enforcement becomes obsolete. A civilization that self-regulates not out of law, but out of subconscious alignment with engineered norms. And here's a thought they never want whispered aloud. What if the system isn't just observing behavior to maintain order, but to identify and quietly neutralize anyone who resists it? Not with raids, not with force, but with silence, delayed emails, missed opportunities, social credit shadows, invisible deprioritization in housing, jobs, healthcare. You won't know when you've been flagged. You'll just start slipping, quietly, systematically, until you disappear from influence, but not from the map. So next time you pass a traffic light that seems too quiet, or a camera that doesn't blink, ask yourself, is this just infrastructure? Or is it listening for something I haven't even thought yet? I am the anonymous voice they hope you ignore. I speak what they won't print. I ask the questions that don't get answered. If one day these files stop, you'll know they got too close. Follow off record before they make us silent.